Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about an exercise I like to use. It's called the power curl. It seems to be a little less popular these days from what I can tell versus in the past. This used to be an extremely popular lift among strength athletes, still seems to be among strength athletes, and a lot of bodybuilders used to use this. Again, for bicep development, it works quite well. Again, you saw this a lot even in the 70s, 80s. A lot of those guys use what they would call it a cheat curl. In more strength sports, we tend to call this a power curl. And a couple of things to note here. Number one, yes, it's a bicep exercise, first and foremost, but it's also a phenomenal grip exercise. It's a good upper back exercise. There are other influencers out there who do promote this, although they'll oftentimes call it a cheat curl. I've seen guys like Eric Bugenhagen promote it. And again, I tend to agree that this exercise is very good. It allows us to turn a curl into a multi-joint movement. It allows us to get a very large eccentric overload, and it allows us to do so safely. And a lot of times people will see this and they'll see swinging and they're like, oh, this is dangerous. You're going to, potentially tear a bicep. Well, yeah, if you do it incorrectly. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. But you see preacher curls and things like that causing enormous numbers of bicep tears. Those are largely overused, putting things at bad angles. The thing that you need to note with some of that, a few points here, and then I'll get into eccentric overload in a minute. All right, number one, notice the forward lean. Okay, notice my torso never goes completely upright at any point in the movement. I am always leaning forward at an angle. Why? Because usually if we're going to rupture due to too much tension on the bicep, it's going to be near the bottom with the arm too far forward. But notice that as I go up, and you can't always tell on all the angles, I'm pulling my elbow back. Okay, what's the reason for this? It allows us to keep the weight very close to us so it doesn't go way out in front, and then when we start going into that lengthened position, have excessive weight. Right, we still have a lot of load in that lengthened position, but it is usually a weight that the bicep can handle. Right, so you're seeing that heavy eccentric loading, eccentric meaning the lowering. Again, you'll hear eccentric overload discussed in a lot of studies on hypertrophy, and this is a perfect example of it. But we'll get into that in a second. So let's go back over to the forward lean. The forward lean dramatically reduces the chances of injuring a bicep. Okay, it's that leaning back. That's what gets you. And you'll see that again with preacher curls, right? If you look at the movement where they tear, people tend to rupture biceps right down in the bottom fourth to third of the movement. Okay, and in this case, because we're pulling back away from that, the tension is a little more even there, right? It's being reduced a little bit. But the thing is, it's still a very, very complete amount of tension on the muscle there. So it's still getting the growth stimulus in that lengthened position, because we're having to use that to slow the eccentric back down. We're having to use the biceps to stop the weight. But we're doing so in a way that's manageable for the tendons. Okay, and notice it is a full range of motion exercise. Okay, there's no partial involved. It is all the way up, all the way down toward the bicep. Because some people would say, well, it's not going up to the face, and that's true. But because we're pulling the elbows back, we are hitting the top, right? We're hitting the full range of motion of the elbow. The joint's moving through the full range of motion. All right. Other take-homes here on the form. Notice my wrists are cocked back. Again, had everyone known to do that, the easy curl bar might not have ever been invented. Easy curl bars, they're oftentimes used. Why? Because people's wrists hurt when they use a straight bar. Hey, if you go for a wider grip, just a hair outside of shoulder width, which is what I do, or slightly wider than that if you want. Some people go out pretty wide. And you keep the wrist cocked backwards. Notice my hand trails behind my forearm. You don't ever curl it up. It's always rotated back a little bit. Okay, this relieves that extra cramping and stress that you tend to get on the forearm. Okay, it removes that. You'll find this is actually fairly forearm friendly, other than the fact that you have to grip the weight. So again, it's about positioning, right? It's about positioning, because it's a very controlled cheat. Notice the cheat's consistent. There's no jerking back. It's not changing from rep to rep to where you're trying to lay back with it or anything. it's one fluid movement, right? It's one fluid movement using just enough body English to get the weight moving, and then have an eccentric that would be a slightly heavier weight than you would be able to handle. And by doing that, again, we create eccentric overload. And when you look at all those studies that are out there, people will point that out. They're like, well, there's all these studies showing that heavy eccentrics, can build muscle. Well, usually they require machines and stuff to do, right? To get that eccentric overload. It's really a hassle. On a movement like this, you can create it just as easily as doing the regular exercise. Because it's a smaller movement, we can use just a little bit of body English, so that we have a really heavy eccentric that we can then control enough to get an enormous growth stimulus. Well, again, we get bicep growth. This is one of the few exercises that ever really helped me with my biceps. I struggle with biceps. I have some of the worst bicep genetics in the world. If you guys remember years ago, people would still clown me about having really small arms, they felt. When I used to do tons of really strict curling, I used to do a lot of incline curls with dumbbells, and people would look at that and go, wow, you're doing really strict sets to failure. On an incline curl, your biceps, lag. And I would do plenty of them, right? It's things like that didn't help me that much, unfortunately. These movements like this do. That eccentric overload, there's something to be said for it at times. And I'm not saying that it's necessary for everyone. I'm just saying it's a valuable tool. But it also shows that this is why it still stimulates growth. All right, but a lot of the big benefits, why do we do this? The sports carryover, the upper back development, the help with grip. All right, this is a great grip training tool. This is one reason I like to use it. It helps build grip a lot more effectively than a regular curl, because you're having to catch that weight at the bottom. Also, because of that wrist position, you have to really hold onto that bar. It is a good grip training tool. It's a good upper back tool, right? It's a very good trapezius exercise. Well, makes it a deadlift accessory, right? This is a great deadlift accessory accordingly. For me as a powerlifter, I like that. A lot of strong men like this because it carries over to a lot of their movements, because there's so much bicep work that's heavy multi-joint exercises. It helps strengthen their biceps for their sport. So again, this is very popular. I know quite a few strong men who love this exercise. Right? The deadlift dad's one of them. You guys know who that is. So these are the reasons we do this lift. This is how you perform it safely. I'm a fan of it. I like it. So I hope this has been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.